settle into what that day felt like.
There's another kind of set of characters within this panel, which is I I assume that they're almost like butterflies, but they have helmets on. Maybe they're
Oh
moss.
yeah.
Those are, those have a weird but interesting presence here. Not as harsh as the werewolves, but the helmets, again, kind of point towards perhaps police or an authority. Can you tell us what they're doing there?
Sure. That was sort of an instinctual thing that just came out of the process of drawing and just drawing and redrawing things. And this butterfly, mid butterfly chrysalis cop was sort of a weird nod to the way in which these forms of these tropes of white supremacy are evolving for me as I continue to make them, but evolving for all of us. I mean, you know, does this mean that do the events of this day and the images of this day mean that like we should reevaluate all of Marvel imagery? I certainly have. Does that mean it falls directly into, especially now that we know that it falls directly into some of the self mythologizing of white supremacist groups? I think it's very important to think of those things. I mean, it's always been there, and that's sort of the point, I guess. But um, these things are evolving. They're not just the the clan hoods anymore. I actually feel less interested, for example, in putting hoods on everything. It feels more important, prescient to like for the cop helmets to be the sort of stand-in, the Gustin type stand-in for the clan hoods, because that's a much more, I guess, banal way in which day to day folks, people of color, encounter white supremacy. It's through police and policing.
It is interesting to think of characters or cartoons having that ability. It's not just a figure, but also a an embodiment of different narratives and concepts that don't necessarily exist in a specific time, but have these connections, perhaps in the past, in the moment, based on their atmosphere, and again, moving forward, depending on the artist's hand, the artist's intentionality of where they're getting their imagery from. Um, with that, I think before we kind of wrap this up, let's talk about where you're moving forward in your own practice. Are you developing these these kind of characters within your own work, like the werewolf? Are you going to continue with Marvel? What else are you looking at for, I guess, references, visual references to build these characters?
I'm still looking at the Marvel stuff. I'm looking at thinking a lot through the werewolf as the way to kind of approach this. It's, I think, a way to dealing with how complicated and messy things are. I think the werewolf can apply not just to sort of right wing tendencies, but to sort of these different complicated tendencies and ways of dealing with how complicated things people feel about cancel culture, whatever, if that's a real thing and whatnot. I think it's a way to deal with that. But this is sort of a long-winded way of coming back to the fact that I don't actually feel like I'm quite done with January 6th. I keep coming back to that. There's certain images just from this installation alone that I think I'm still extrapolating things from. So one of the characters that I kind of pulled out of this was this Captain America werewolf. Um, and I went from having that be a work on paper with acrylic ink, sort of just plastered onto the wall, to kind of moving it back into the space of the canvas, seeing what would happen if I applied weight, dimensionality through oil and whatnot. So I'm kind of coming back to that, and I'm actually thinking I may actually need to go further inside the Capitol and per some more information that we've been getting, and actually restage some actual events and footage. from that day.
Yeah, I think that sounds amazing. I would love to see how that works out and how it develops over time. And I think that these two pieces um, really, although both of these series that you've worked on over the past few years um, are kind of different, they share your kind of evolution of this practice of trying to create a scene, create these characters to get at the meat of the thing, or like the quicker um, story behind all of these really complicated, connected ideas. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this, and um, hoping the best for you in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, same. Thank you so much, Monica. This has been great.
All right, I'll talk to you soon, Renee.
All right. Thanks,
Bye.
Monica.